How's going guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto sent to the My Little Pony universe? Part 1. Huge shout out to Fan of Fanfics for this story. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. Eyes squeezed shut in concentration, Twilight Sparkle, unicorn student to Equestria's Princess Celestia, breathed in slowly, centering herself for what she was trying to do. A veritable magic junkie, Twilight was always ready to learn and attempt a new spell, and this looked to be the most difficult one yet. As her horn began to glow with a magical aura, her concentration was broken by the voice of her assistant, a young dragon named Spike. "Twilight, are you sure about this?" he asked the purple unicorn, who cracked her eyes open as the glowing aura around her horn vanished. "This spell sounds like it might be dangerous." Twilight rolled her eyes and Spike scoffed. "We've been over this, Spike," she replied confidently. "It's perfectly safe. The spell creates a bridge between two beings, whether they be from Equestria or one of the theoretically infinite otherworlds beyond our reality. Nothing to be worried about. You know, except for the possibility of you being trapped in another world or pulling something really dangerous into our world," the dragon replied sarcastically, but Twilight again rolled her eyes. "Spike, in order to make a bridge, I would need a willing being to connect to on the other side. Since nobody knows that I'm using the spell, they can't willingly connect to make a bridge. This is completely safe," she announced, matter-of-factly. "What could possibly go wrong?" Spike felt a chill go down his spine as she said that, knowing that just the mere uttering of those words would cause everything that could possibly go wrong to do so. Not wanting to be around when something did go wrong, Spike hightailed in out of the library. Closing her eyes again to regain her focus, Twilight's horn again began to glow with magic, brighter this time as the library was free of distraction. Kinda. "Hi Twilight." "Ah." The unicorn shouted in fright and irritation at the three loud voices behind her. Leaping into the air, she turned and took in the sight of three fillies. Apple Bloom, Sweetie Belle, and Scootaloo, collectively self-dubbed as the Cutie Mark Crusaders. "Can I help you three?" she asked, trying to get her breathing under control. "Do you have any books on magic and flying?" Sweetie Belle asked, the young unicorn stepping forward with a bright, hopeful smile. Twilight was confused, and for good reason. "Huh?" she exclaimed. "But you can't use magic yet," she said, before turning to Scootaloo. "And you can't fly." Scootaloo scoffed. "Yet," she countered. "But maybe with a few books we could both figure it out. I wanted to ask Rainbow Dash, but we couldn't find her." Twilight rolled her eyes, thinking her rainbow main friend was probably napping up on a cloud. "Alright," she conceded. "I guess I can see what we have." "Yeah." The fillies shouted excitedly, beginning to zip from bookshelf to bookshelf, ripping books from their places and throwing them to the mare, who could do nothing but stare in shock as her neat and tidy library home was reduced to a state of total disarray in a matter of moments. Somehow, even with as fast as they were rushing, the Crusaders each picked out a book, with Apple Bloom even picking out a fiction story. She didn't want to be left out. "We'll take these, please." At a loss for words, Twilight simply checked out their books for them, eye twitching. The moment the three fillies had left the large tree that served as Twilight's home and the town library, the purple unicorn turned with a sigh as she looked at the chaos before her. A look of determination and irritation crossed her face as her horn began to glow, letting her levitate the books and assorted objects back to their proper places on the shelves. Even with magic though, the job would take Twilight quite a while. When she had gotten things back to the way they were, she dashed around the library, locking the door and shutting the windows and curtains. Breathing a sigh of relief, she dove to her own book, once more finding the spell she was attempting to learn. Looking to her left, then her right, she closed her eyes again once it was confirmed that she was totally alone. For the third time, her horn began to glow, the aura increasing in intensity, beginning to encompass the unicorn's whole body. To be truthful, she didn't actually know how to tell if she was doing it right without having some pony to connect to. But better to learn the spell than to find herself in a situation she might need it. "Twilight." The unicorn screamed as one of the floorboards beside her creaked open like a trapdoor and a pink-coated earth pony shot out. Her concentration gave way and her fright caused the magical aura to fluctuate, culminating in one massive pulse of magic that rocketed both Twilight to the ceiling, and her pink friend was sent crashing into a bookshelf, knocking a pile of books down on top of her. And then the magic just stopped expanding and instead shot back and receded, imploding back in on itself at the tip of Twilight's horn. "Oh, this isn't good," the unicorn said, cringing, knowing she was no longer in control of what she had set in motion. All around Ponyville, residents turned their attention to the beam of light and magic that erupted from the library and into the sky. "Whoa," groaned Pinkie Pie, popping out from beneath the books. "I haven't felt this shaken up since I fired myself from my party cannon." A singed and battered looking Twilight shook off her own shock, staring at her friend in bewilderment. Outside of the Konoha Shinobi Academy, a young boy, with blonde hair and whisker-like markings on his cheeks, sat on the lone swing, watching the other children get picked up by their parents. The boy, at only 6, had just started at the academy recently, and already he hated it. But only because the academy hated him too. He still didn't understand just why it was that nobody seemed to like him. He tried being nice, but nobody ever treated him any better. He tried playing jokes to get the other kids to like him, but they found him more annoying than anything. He watched with a longing and a bitterness that no child should ever have to feel. Looked at the happiness that filled the eyes of the other children, while his own held none. Many of the adults looked at him with disdain. A couple of them possibly even gave him a look of pity, but did not reach out to him. Then and there, Naruto made a wish. A wish that came from the heart, from the soul. A wish that came from every fiber of his being. I don't want to be alone anymore, he thought. I wish I had a family, I wish I had friends, I wish my life wasn't so empty. Little did he know the impact such a wish would have. The magical link Twilight had released used the wish of the blonde to tether itself to Naruto, sensing that although he didn't realize it, the boy was willing to do anything to get what he desired. And that desire sealed his fate. Like the unicorn, a magical aura began to surround the blonde, who looked at his glowing self in wonder, before the magic fluctuated, pulsing outward into a dome of energy, in which Naruto was the center. A spark, a flash, and the dome became a beam of light which shot into the sky, parting the clouds above. Children and parents alike screamed at the sight, mirroring the frightened boy within. Slowly, the beam began to narrow in width, and those who stayed long enough to watch the entire scene gasped in awe and fear as the light swallowed the boy entirely before fading out of existence. Vomiting was the first thing Naruto managed to be able to do. Around him was a vast expanse of many colored lights, zooming past at high speed. Looking at the many spinning colors, Naruto turned his attention to his own body, which despite being unable to feel anything, seemed to be stretching and compressing, distorting and shifting shape at alarming rates. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. Trying to move, he desperately swung his arms and legs trying to get a hold of something, but could not. A scream broke the silence now, and he instinctively knew that it was his failed scream from moments ago, escaping now despite his lips holding closed. What's happening? He thought, afraid to try and talk again. Suddenly, he felt something snake around his wrist, though he could see nothing there. This only served to frighten the child further as he was suddenly pulled by the arm towards a tiny green dot, serving as a break in the neon expanse. As he got closer and closer, the dot got bigger and bigger, and he braced himself. Preparing to crash, he was surprised when he first felt a breeze before hitting the disc, which hurled him out of the bizarre twisted place. And then the crash finally did come. What was that? Sweetie Belle asked, she and the other crusaders hearing a rather audible thump sound coming from outside their clubhouse. Closing their respective books, they walked outside, eyes going wide at the sight of a strange creature laying on the ground, covered in leaves and broken branches, looking for all it was worth, as if he had fallen out of a tree, breaking all the branches on the way down. Sure enough, they looked up and saw that several branches that had previously been in the tree above were now missing. Inching forward, Scootaloo nudged the new, rather bizarre creature with her hoof, jumping in shock when it groaned and turned over. Any idea what it is? Asked Applebloom, moving in to look at the face of the unconscious thing. No clue, Scootaloo admitted. Sweetie Belle's eyes lit up as an idea struck her. Hey, I bet Fluttershy does. The unicorn filly announced. She knows all about weird animals. The other two seemed to accept her idea. Applebloom turned to the Pegasus pony. Scoot, you're the fastest on that scooter of yours. We'll wait here and you go find Fluttershy, she said. Scootaloo gave a salute before taking off as fast as she could. She had first tried Fluttershy's cottage home, but the Pegasus pony was nowhere to be found. Deciding instead to try the town, Scootaloo managed to come out with more luck, finding Fluttershy, Rarity, and Pinkie Pie, doing a bit of shopping. And the whole place just went boom. And I was like whoa. And then I crashed into a bookshelf. I mean, all I wanted to do was see what she was working on. Scootaloo skidded to a stop in time to hear Pinkie finish whatever story she was telling. Unfortunately, the cloud of dust she created shot all over the three older mares, nearly giving Rarity a heart attack from how dirty she now was. But Scootaloo ignored the shocked yet enraged glare, instead turning toward the pony she was searching for. Fluttershy, you gotta come see this. She shouted, more excited than frantic. There's some kind of creature we've never seen before. We think it might be hurt because it crashed from a tree and wasn't awake. The older Pegasus gasped. If Scootaloo was right, then some sort of animal needed her help, and there was no way she could ever deny it that help. Scootaloo, she asked, and both Pinkie Pie and Rarity recognized the tone that was only in her voice when some kind of animal was in trouble. Where exactly did you find this creature? Turning her scooter, the orange filly motioned for Fluttershy to follow. The normally slow-flying Fluttershy, knowing some poor creature might be in pain, now easily kept pace, flying just above the younger Pegasus. Pinkie and Rarity both followed as well. Neither wanted to miss this. When they arrived back at the site of the Crusaders' clubhouse, the first thing they noticed was that the new creature, who even Fluttershy admitted she'd never seen nor heard of before, was still out cold. It was Rarity that made the more subtle observation. "Is it wearing clothes? I mean, if you can even call those hideous things clothing," she asked, and indeed, it did dawn on the other ponies that the thing was wearing clothing of some kind. Perhaps it's intelligent or an exotic pet whose owner just has horrible taste in fashion. She theorized, while Fluttershy inspected what she instinctively knew to be a child. She just couldn't discern what species of animal the child was. After giving the child a thorough inspection, noticing only a few minor injuries that were already on their way to healing, she turned and addressed Rarity's assumptions. "Well, firstly, it is actually a he," she began. "And I don't think he's anyone's pet. There's nothing on him that would identify him, or an owner." Turning to Apple Bloom, she asked the filly, "Apple Bloom, could you go see if you can borrow your sister's cart, please? I think we should bring the poor little thing to my cottage. I have my supplies there, and I don't want to shake him up more than we have two on the way." The three Crusaders agreed, before taking off to go get the cart, while the mares waited with the unconscious child now. "I've never seen anything like him," Fluttershy announced when the fillies were out of sight. Moving closer to the child. Already, the bruises he had from his crash landing had shrunk. "That's odd," she mused, looking at the damage he and the tree had done to each other. Pinkie too was examining the boy, looking at him curiously, particularly his hands. Sure, she had seen creatures that had hands, but they were usually clawed and sometimes scaly, like Spike. Rarity was looking him over, though more mentally taking his measurements. She would have to get them later. Once the kid woke up, he was going nowhere until she had given him something decent. The rag of a shirt he wore was ghastly, and that was only the one half of his current outfit. It would never do. Without warning, Pinkie gasped, causing the other ponies to leap back in surprise. "Hey!" she practically shouted. "If Fluttershy doesn't know what he is, maybe Twilight does. She has a book for everything." The subject of their attention groaned slightly, and Fluttershy rushed to him, looking him over, but noticed he was still out of it. Blowing a strand of mane from her eyes, Fluttershy jumped in fright at the shrill sound of the Crusaders announcing their return, cart in tow. Being careful not to jostle the child too much, Rarity and Fluttershy moved him to the cart, which Pinkie Pie had quickly taken to pulling, making their way to Fluttershy's home. Along the way, the older Pegasus hovered just above the slow-moving transport, watching the eyelids of the strange creature twitch, but not open. He would likely be out of it for a little while yet, at least. Laying him in her own bed, Fluttershy moved downstairs, addressing the other ponies. "Well," she said. "He's still out of it, but I think once he gets some rest he should be fine. Pinkie, would it be too much trouble to ask you to find Twilight and see if she might be able to identify just what he is?" Pinkie adopted as serious of an expression as she could before giving her timid friend a salute, bounding out the door. Head throbbing, Naruto opened his eyes and immediately closed them again. The light was simply too bright. Despite the ringing in his ears, he could at least make out the voice, sounding like a young girl. "Fluttershy," she shouted. "I think he's waken up." Naruto mumbled something, and whoever was speaking seemed to have heard him. "And I think he can talk." Noted a bizarre accent, but put it out of his mind. The sound he next heard at first sounded like multiple footsteps. However, there was a somewhat different sound to them than normal feet. Of course, he had no idea at this point what hooves on wooden stairs sounded like. He tried to sit up, but was held back down on the bed by said hooves. "Oh, please," a soft voice almost pleaded. "You've obviously been through a lot and you're not healed fully yet." The light groaned Naruto, and he heard a small gasp. "Oh dear, I'm so sorry. Here." From through his eyelids, he noticed the room got darker, hearing the rustling of curtains being pulled closed. "There, is that better?" the voice asked as Naruto again attempted to open his eyes. His vision was still kinda fuzzy, but began to clear, and Naruto noticed he wasn't in any hospital. He also noticed that his current caretaker wasn't exactly human. Rubbing his eyes, he could only stare at the strange winged horse with a yellow coat and a pink mane. It kind of reminded him of that girl who he had met last week in class, Sakura. "I must have hit my head harder than I thought," the young blonde said, falling back onto the pillow as Fluttershy moved closer, examining his forehead. "Oh yes," she announced, either oblivious to his disbelief or ignoring it. "You do have a nasty bump, but it's already starting to go down. Can I get you anything to make you more comfortable?" Naruto tilted his head in confusion. Fortunately, one perk of being a child meant that he was far more accepting of the fact he was being cared for by a pony. Unfortunately, he had no idea what was going on or why, and his brain had to shut down for a while. Fluttershy worried that maybe he had suffered a concussion and waved her hoof in front of his face, receiving only a few blinks as a reaction. She turned to Apple Bloom, who had stuck around longer than the others. "Could you please go get some water?" she asked. "Sure thing," replied the little filly, rushing out of the room. Returning to the still frozen child in her bed, Fluttershy took stock of his injuries, which in only a few hours had gone, leaving very little trace of them. Vaguely hearing the return of small hoofs, she was completely unaware that Apple Bloom had no idea what Fluttershy wanted water for. Which is why the little pony improvised, hurling the water into the blonde boy's face. Despite the alarmed look on Fluttershy's face, she noted the water did have the desired effect, getting the boy to snap out of his stupor, sputtering. "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," Fluttershy said, rushing from the room, returning with a rather fluffy towel, drying the boy. "So, what's your name?" The blonde was muffled by the towel, so couldn't reply, but when it was removed from his face, he managed to answer. "I'm Naruto," he said. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki." Fluttershy couldn't help but smile at the boy's enthusiasm in the face of his near-total confusion. "My, that's an interesting name," she said. "I'm Fluttershy, and this little filly is Apple Bloom," she announced, motioning to herself and the young pony respectively. "We found you unconscious after you crashed into a tree." Naruto's eyes widened. "A tree? Is that what I hit?" he asked in surprise. "Yup," said Apple Bloom, jumping up on the bed to get a better look at the stranger. "What were you doing up there? Trying to fly?" "No," shot back Naruto, defensively. But he added as an afterthought, "But that would be cool." Apple Bloom just laughed. "Well, maybe you could teach my friend Scootaloo to fly. You and her are about the same level at it already," she giggled. "And you ain't even got wings." When the filly said that, it again drew Naruto's attention to the mare, who was currently fluffing up his pillows. Yeah, this was way better than a hospital. But his gaze was drawn to her wings, something which Apple Bloom was quick to notice. "What you looking at? You look like you never seen a Pegasus pony before," she said, and Naruto nodded. "I haven't," he admitted. "I've never even seen or heard of any pony that could even talk before." That caught the attention of the two ponies, who looked like the young boy had grown a second head. "I have some friends that should be here shortly. Maybe when they get here, we can try and understand what is going on here. Oh, if it's not too much trouble," she added as an afterthought. Naruto shook his head, the little boy just as confused as the ponies. "I kinda wanna know what's going on myself," he replied. Deep within child, something dark stirred for only a moment. It went unnoticed. Noises from downstairs alerted Fluttershy of her friend's arrival. She ceased the pillow fluffing before easing Naruto back onto them. "You just wait here, alright?" she said. "We'll be back in a few minutes and then we can try and figure things out." As she and Apple Bloom prepared to leave the room, Naruto decided to say one least thing. "Is Fluttershy?" Turning back around, she let the blonde know he had her full attention. He just gave her a smile. "Thanks." Smiling back, she nodded in response. "You're most welcome," she replied, before turning again to go meet her friends. Again, a dark force within Naruto came alive, only for a moment. But this time, down in Fluttershy's living area, the horn of a purple unicorn glowed. She looked up the stairs and tried to peek at what exactly might be causing it, but couldn't see what was in Fluttershy's bedroom. Whatever it was, she knew she should be wary. "So is he awake?" Rarity asked, attempting to break the silence brought on by Twilight's hard stare up into Fluttershy's bedroom. Fluttershy nodded. "Yes, he just woke up a few minutes ago," she replied, standing in front of the stairs to prevent her friends from going up just yet. "He seems relatively fine, but he's rather confused. He said he's never seen a Pegasus before or even heard a pony talk." "Oh, he can talk?" Pinky asked excitedly, practically bouncing twice her normal height. "He's never heard a pony talk or seen a Pegasus pony?" Twilight questioned, almost incredulous at the very idea. "That seems very unlikely." Fluttershy shook her head. "I don't think he's lying. He's young, possibly the same age as the Crusaders, at least in terms of whatever his species is," she rebutted. "Poor thing is probably just as scared as he is confused." Moving to the side, she gave one final piece of advice. "Go easy with the questions, please. We don't want to upset him." Walking into the room, Twilight's horn began to glow again, but only for a moment. The ponies who hadn't seen him yet gawked as the little blonde boy tilted his head, eyes transfixed on Twilight's horn. Had anyone paid attention, they would have noted his eyes flashed the same color as Twilight's magical aura. It was only a split second though. "Naruto," Fluttershy said, moving alongside the bed. "These are my friends. This is Twilight Sparkle, Rarity, and Rainbow Dash." As she went through the names, she pointed a hoof toward whom each name belonged to, and one by one, they gave a little wave of their own hooves. "You already know Apple Bloom. The one right behind her is her older sister, Applejack." Said pony gave him a reassuring smile, which he returned in kind. "These two fillies are Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle." The two plus Apple Bloom leapt up onto the bed next to Naruto. "We're the ones who found you," Scootaloo announced excitedly before Sweetie Belle took over. "Why did you crash into a tree?" she asked. Rarity's eye twitched. Her younger sister was many things, subtle was not one of them. Naruto just rubbed the back of his head. "Your guess is as good as mine," he answered. Anyway, and last but not least, we have where is Pinkie Pie?" At Fluttershy's question, all the ponies began to look around the room for their more energetic friend. From out of nowhere, the blankets on Fluttershy's bed were thrown off, along with the Crusaders, revealing Pinkie beneath. How she had been hiding beneath without being seen was a mystery. As was where the large amount of confetti came from. Before they could ponder it, Pinkie was in Naruto's face, much to her friend's embarrassment and Fluttershy's horror. "Hi. I'm Pinkie Pie. Your name is Naruto, right? That's a funny name, but I like it. What are you? Where did you come from? Are you gonna stay long? What's your favorite flavor of cake so I know what kind to get for your welcome party?" Naruto stared blankly for a moment, his eyes spinning, before he literally shook away his shocked stupor. Nice to meet you, Pinkie Pie. Yes, my name is Naruto. It's not a funny name, I am a human, I come from the village of Konoha. I have no idea how long I'm stuck here, and I've never had cake before, so I have no idea what flavor I'd like." Most of the answers were taken in stride by Ponyville's resident party pony, until the boy had said he had never eaten cake. But the gasp so long and so deep it threatened to remove all the oxygen in the room, Pinkie Pie dashed out of the cottage, leaving a trail of dust in her wake. "Sorry about Pinkie," Rainbow Dash said. "She's always like that." "It's okay," Naruto replied after a moment or two. "It's not the weirdest thing that's happened to me today." Again, Twilight's horn began to glow, and it was beginning to get some attention from more than just Naruto. "Okay, what is going on with that horn, Sugar Cube?" Applejack asked. "It's been doing that since we all got here." Twilight shook her head and fixed her gaze on Naruto. "It's reacting to Naruto for some reason, but I don't know what that reason is," she admitted, making the child feel even more uncomfortable. "Even in my books, I don't recognize any species resembling him, and I can't say I've ever heard of a human before. I think our first course of action should be to send a message to Princess Celestia. She'll know how to handle the situation." The other mares in the room agreed. The basic answers Pinkie had gotten weren't exactly informative, and with as young as he was, they were unlikely to get anything better, at least at the present time. In the meantime, just because I haven't read about humans, doesn't mean they aren't in the books at the library. "Fluttershy, would you mind coming over and taking another look through the books with me? Oh, and we'll need to find Spike. I haven't seen him since before the accident earlier." Fluttershy gasped. "Oh yes," she said. "Pinkie Pie told us about that. What happened? Nobody got hurt, did they?" Twilight shook her head and the Pegasus sighed in relief. "Ain't Twilight," Rainbow Dash spoke up. "What were you doing anyway? I saw that pillar of light from clear across Ponyville." Naruto tilted his head. "Pillar of light?" Twilight just face-hooved. "Not my fault. Pinkie Pie jumped out of nowhere and scared me, and it caused me to lose control of the spell I was learning," she said, and the others mares in the room just nodded understandingly. They knew how volatile Twilight's magic was, and they also knew, a little too well, how unpredictable their pink friend could be. Honestly, if this was the first time something like that had happened, each and every one of them would be surprised. "And what exactly does your new spell do?" inquired Rarity. But before Twilight could speak, she once more glimpsed at Naruto and something in her brain clicked. A human appearing from nowhere, with no knowledge of ponies or Equestria. That was the reason her horn was reacting to him. Her spell must have overloaded and attached to an unaware human. Her mouth snapped shut into a panicked smile, and her eyes darted around the room. "Oh, you know me," she said quickly, nervously laughing for good measure. "I care more about learning the spell than what it does." Her friend stared at her curiously, Applejack going so far as to look skeptical. Darn element of honesty. "Well, I guess," Fluttershy began, embarrassing Twilight further. "She didn't really have that problem, did she?" Of course she did scoff at the idea of her earlier spell going wrong. She was glad when attention turned back to Naruto and she continued. "Naruto, do you think you're ready to move around some?" "Finally!" shouted Naruto, leaping out of the bed, landing next to the giggling Crusaders. "Man, I hate being pent up. I wanna stretch my legs and go meet more ponies." The mares giggled now, though Twilight was still giggling more nervously than for mirth. Fluttershy stepped forward. "Alright then, but I don't want you overdoing it. I really think you should take it easy and ride in Applejack's cart." Naruto groaned. "But Ms. Fluttershy." Laughing at his childlike whine, Applejack moved lower to Naruto's level, looking him right in the eye. "No buts, mister," she said. "If Fluttershy says you should ride, but if you don't like the cart, I got another idea for you." "Woo-oh." Naruto cheered, riding through Ponyville, Applejack playing the part of his trusty steed. Looking at how much Naruto was being bounced and jostled, Fluttershy didn't know whether to scold her friend or to thank her, as it certainly seemed to be cheering the blonde up immensely. "Dear Princess Celestia. You'll never believe this." Celestia smiled. Before her floated one of Twilight's letters. She loved reading them and often looked forward to them. "We discovered a new species today. I've never seen anything like it." The princess tilted her head as the word "it" appeared to be scratched out and was replaced by him. He called himself a human. That name is strange in and of itself. Have you heard of anything like that before? "I don't believe I have." Princess Luna nodded as she passed by several of the palace guards. She heard her sister mumble and nearly trample over her out of distraction. "Humo?" Celestia smiled down at her sister, who turned away with a light blush. "Sorry, dear sister." "It's fine." Luna spoke, only to blink as the floating letter hovered before her face. "Sister." The note straightened out and Luna read some of it. "Have you ever heard of a human before?" After a moment, she shook her head. "No. I would have to see what it looks like first." Celestia nodded and kept reading. "Hopefully we will be able to. Soon. Anyway, Fluttershy has seemed to take a rather quick liking to the creature. At the very least we should be able to count on her to keep this human somewhat comfortable." Celestia grew a rather amused expression. Beside her, Luna took to peeking at the letter as they resumed their walk. "But I wrote this letter because we are in great need of your guidance. We know nothing of this creature, which we require if we are to care for him." Luna looked up to her sister as she suddenly stopped. Luna glanced to the next line. "What does she?" Luna began, only to see her sister's face marred by a concerned look. "We will be urgently waiting for a reply. Your faithful subject, Twilight Sparkle." Celestia glanced down and saw that there was more. "P.S. I really need to speak to you about a private matter. One I cannot put on paper." Twilight watched as Spike sent the letter to Celestia. Now she just had to wait for the reply. But first, to figure out what they should do about that creature. What did he eat? Was he anything like Spike? Would they be able to get Naruto home, or would he be forced to adjust to their way of life? And worst of all, how would the blonde-haired child, let alone her friends, take the news that this very well could all be her fault? She looked out the window at the boy, who looked around excitedly as her friends, sans Fluttershy and Spike, who were each going through and looking for books, respectively now, pointed out shops and places in Ponyville and what they were. "Let's hope the princess replies soon," Fluttershy announced. "If Naruto is going to stay here, I'll need more information about him, and so far, I haven't found anything about humans in these books." "I don't see what the big deal is," Spike said. "I mean, he can talk, right? Why can't he just tell you what he needs?" Twilight sighed. "He's a child, Spike," she explained. "He needs some pony to look after him and make sure he has what he needs, not just what he wants or thinks he needs." "She's right," Fluttershy agreed. "Poor thing needs some pony to take care of him until we find out where he came from and send him back to his parents. I'm sure they miss him terribly." "I don't have parents." Turning to look at the now very depressed child, the two mares and young dragon watched his brilliant blue eyes dull in sadness as he rode in on Applejack's back. A collective gasp filled the air at the words and the sudden change in the bubbly blonde. Fluttershy practically froze from guilt, feeling responsible for touching on such a sore subject. For the moment, Twilight forgot her own guilt and stepped forward, ignoring the pulsating glow caused by her horn. "You're an orphan?" she asked, receiving a nod in reply. "But you must have family or friends that take care of you," Rarity said, hopefully. She of course knew that there were those without family. A frown marred her face when he shook his head in the negative. "Nobody," he said quietly. "Just the old man Hokage, but he has to run the entire village, so I never get to see him." Seeing a chance to change the subject to something less depressing, Fluttershy spoke up. "Hokage? Is that the leader of where you come from?" Naruto nodded. "Well, we have the mayor of Ponyville, and then we have Princess Celestia and Princess Luna." Naruto perked up a bit. "Princesses?" he said, getting excited now. "Are they ponies too?" From beneath him, Applejack nodded, crouching low to let the young boy off her back. "Yup," she said. "But they're a bit different. They're all acorns, which is a pony with wings like a Pegasus and a horn like a unicorn." And speaking of the princesses, she looked at Twilight expectantly. "I sent a letter to Princess Celestia, but I haven't received a reply yet." Applejack nodded. Made sense. She couldn't expect to receive a reply so soon after sending it out. No sooner had the thought crossed her mind than Spike belched out the reply to their message. Levitating it over to herself, Twilight read the letter aloud. "My dearest, most faithful student. I have knowledge of nearly all creatures in Equestria, but never before have I heard of a human as you called it. Likewise, my sister, Princess Luna, has no recollection of such a creature. We shall both consult the royal archives for any information, but the odds are most certainly against us." The five mares shared a look before Twilight continued reading. If he truly is a new species, this is a remarkable discovery, and I will personally come to Ponyville tomorrow to speak with you and find out about this human. Your mentor, Princess Celestia. The crash took their attention away from the letter as they saw Pinkie Pie leap in through the library window, doing a combat roll and returning to her upright position. "Nobody move," she shouted. "I have cake." Naruto just tilted his head, staring at the pink pony in wonder as she strolled forward and, from seemingly nowhere, pulled a very large pastry. It even had a stick figure of him drawn out of frosting. Looking from the cake to Pinkie, Twilight was just shocked she hadn't expected this of her. "Two questions, Pinkie," she said. 1. Why did you go to all the trouble of baking a cake for Naruto instead of just buying him a single piece to try? Pinkie Pie tilted her head now, staring at Twilight as if it was the unicorn that was the crazy one. "Well duh," she replied, as though it was common knowledge. "I can't let him try just any cake for his first. If anything was wrong with it, it could turn him off to cake for life. I cannot let that happen." She stomped her front hoof for emphasis. "Since this was way too important to leave to chance, I decided to make one myself. And every pony knows that freshly baked treats are the best anyways." After a moment to process, Twilight just nodded. It did make sense, in a sort of bizarre Pinkie Pie kind of way. "Alright," she said. "Next question, why did you break my window instead of just using the door?" Again, the Earth Pony scoffed. "Pause, then it wouldn't be a surprise, silly." As Twilight's eye began to twitch, she giggled, snorting a bit. Crouching to eye level with Naruto, she sliced the cake and had one on a place in front of him faster than his eyes could follow. Seeing her expectant look and smile, Naruto tentatively reached out and grabbed the fork she had brought. For a second, he wondered how ponies could use forks, but then he realized Spike had fingers, so maybe there were other species that did too. Taking a small chunk of cake, he put it in his mouth. It took him less than a second to figure out that cake was the only thing he had ever eaten that came close to ramen. It took less than 5 seconds for him to scarf the rest of his piece and an entire other piece. "Oh," Naruto Fluttershy said, worriedly. "Don't eat so quickly. You'll make yourself sick." "Mission accomplished," Pinkie Pie said, giggling as the boy, mouth full of cake, leapt up and hugged her around her neck. "Don't ever worry about your sweet needs," she told the blonde. "You just come to Auntie Pinkie Pie. I could always use a taste tester." Naruto nodded vigorously, causing the others to laugh at his enthusiasm. His mouth still full of cake, the blonde uttered something that sounded only vaguely like "thank you." "Wait until he tries some of your apple goods," Spike snickered to Applejack. "He'll never want to leave." Fluttershy perked up at that. "That's probably not a bad idea," she said, turning to the farmer. "He obviously likes sweet things, and while they might not be the right diet for him, apples are usually pretty healthy. I can use them to hold him over until I find out his proper diet." Applejack nodded, asking her how many she thought she'd need. "Oh, maybe start with 3 pounds, the Pegasus replied. "If I need more, I can always buy more." 3 pounds, coming up, Applejack announced, moving toward the door. "I'll drop 'em off at your place." Fluttershy nodded. "I'll have the bits for you when you do," Fluttershy replied. With the food at least taken care of for now, it was Rarity's turn to do her thing. With her horn aglow, a tape measure popped into existence, levitating around the still-eating boy. "Hold still, please, Naruto," she said, and the boy stopped what he was doing long enough for the measure to snake its way around his chest, waist, arms, legs. It was actually rather uncomfortable, and Naruto didn't even want to know what he was being measured for. Definitely not what I'm used to, but I can make it work. Some dress clothes, casual wear." "Fluttershy, darling, are you going to try and see if he can attend school? If so, I should make a few outfits for that too." Naruto paled as the other 4 mares shared a look before collectively looking down at the blonde, who turned a little pale at the mention of school. If it was anything like the academy, he was sure he wanted nothing to do with it. "It probably wouldn't be a bad idea," Twilight said after a moment. "It would help him learn more about Equestria, which will be useful if he's stuck here. Not to mention, it will give him something to do while he's here." "Yeah, but school is kinda boring," blanched Rainbow Dash. She was prevented from continuing when Pinkie leaped out from behind her, toppling her over. "Yeah, but he might also make some super cool friends there," she announced. Naruto watched in a combination of fear and confusion, more from the fact they were talking about sending him to pony school and doing so right in front of him. He already knows Apple Bloom, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo. It might be nice for him to hang around others his own age, Fluttershy agreed. Naruto paled as the girls started to agree that school probably wouldn't be such a bad idea. He gulped. Applejack smiled in victory as some apples fell into her basket. As soon as she left the group, she immediately went to a tree that was just ripe with the red fruit. It was better to get Fluttershy and Naruto fresh apples straight from the source. But, she was very curious to what Naruto's kind ate. Regardless, she hoped apples would suffice. She was about to buck the tree to bring down some more fresh apples, only for an apple to land on her head and roll right into the bucket. What in tarnation? She turned back to the tree, only to see her little sister. Huh? Apple bloom. The little pony grew a look of concentration as she bucked the tree, only for the apples to swing, but not fall. Come on, you. Mind if I ask what brought this on? Applejack raised a brow at her little sister, but she had a small smirk hidden on her face. Bucking again, Apple Bloom didn't bother to look at her sister. I found him, and I feel that I should be helping. One apple fell this time, which Applejack quickly moved the bucket for it to fall in. Somehow. Applejack smiled. That's the spirit, sis. She smiled. It looked like her sister had found a new friend. One she wanted to help feel more at home. Apple Bloom kicked again, but alas, the apples only swung from the impact. But slowly, one apple fell and struck the little filly in the head. Then another, which was followed by a third. The scene caused Applejack to laugh and swirls to appear in Apple Bloom's eyes. Alright, I think that'll about do for the order. Unless you could do with a few more lumps on your noggin. Now Apple Bloom mumbled. She shook her head and stared at the apple before her. Maybe Naruto wanted a nice juicy red apple right about now. She hoped Applejack wouldn't mind. No, that will not do. Rarity's horn glowed as she tossed a large piece of cloth to the side. Come on, Rarity, she said to herself. You just need to think. Before her was one of her many mannequins. But Naruto didn't walk on 4 legs. He had 2 legs he walked on and a pair of arms. If she wanted to pull this off, she would have to think of Spike. Luckily, she had a Spike mannequin made for just the occasion. But Naruto was a tad bigger and lacked a tail well, as far as she could see. Her horn glowed once again and she brought in her little tape measure. She would have to modify the Spike mannequin until she could get a Naruto one made. Now what would be a color that would go with the child? Perhaps a blue to match his eyes. She kept mumbling to herself, but to an outsider, she was nothing but a blur. It was like there were 10 of her. Tape measures, cloth, needles and other items flew around everywhere. Inside the library, it looked like Pinky had one of her parties. Books were in a pile, and the pony and dragon were zipping about the entire place on their mission. Not this one. And not this one. Maybe this one. Ah, nope. Ooh. Spike grabbed a book and held it up in triumph. Found you. What? You found it? Twilight yelled with a smile. Spike looked back at the book. Oh, no. I was looking for this one last week. Must have fell over and got lost. Spike, Twilight mumbled. Around the library, books lie scattered. Not a single mention of the word. Twilight brought another book to her face. On it was the word, dimensions. She flipped it open, but like the others, not a single mention of human. But, the book held other information. Anything? Spike asked as he tossed another book onto the pile. Using her magic, she flipped through page after page. I don't know. Ash flew around Fluttershy and Naruto as she pointed to the shops, in which Naruto looked in awe. Around them, many ponies looked at the young child in curiosity. But to Naruto, it was strange. The looks weren't filled with hate or anger. Some even smiled and nodded to him. And over there is the Carousel Boutique. Rarity's shop. Naruto looked in awe as Dash pointed to building nearby. It looked almost like a castle. No place in his home looked like that. Especially the colors. And over there is the evil place that Fluttershy wants to send you to. Naruto looked further down the road and saw a red building with a red flag in front of it. That was a school. His school never looked like that. Don't say that. I'm sure Naruto will love attending school. Fluttershy smiled down at Naruto. She was about to continue but was interrupted by a loud growl. She glanced at Dash, who only shook her head in the negative. Then she looked back down at the now very red child, whose stomach was growling. Oh, my. Whoa, kiddo. Didn't you just eat an entire cake? Dash flew down and examined the child. Still hungry, he replied, embarrassed. Rainbow Dash simply laughed, while Fluttershy began to think she'd need more apples. And looking at the blushing blonde, she also realized she would need all the help her friends could give her. Naruto, is everything alright in there? Fluttershy called from the hallway. She was waiting on the blonde human boy to finish his bath. He hadn't had one since before he arrived, and while Fluttershy wasn't quite blunt enough to tell Naruto he smelled Rainbow Dash was. Fluttershy was incredibly grateful that her friends were helping out, especially for such a big day. Both Princess Celestia and Princess Luna were coming to meet him today, and it wasn't just the child who was nervous. Twilight seemed even more on edge, which, to be fair, wasn't unexpected as it happened every other time Celestia visited Ponyville. And nobody had seen Princess Luna since she had come to Ponyville for Nightmare Night. Rarity had dropped off the first of Naruto's new wardrobe, as she had called it. Fluttershy wasn't sure she liked the sound of that, but the fashionista had informed her that at some time during the night, she had been hit with a wave of inspiration. Fluttershy had to admit though, the new clothes Rarity had made were very nice looking. She had decided to make his clothing all-purpose and had made a pair of sweatpants in basic black. But the pants, she had provided a choice of 2 shirts, a gold-colored t-shirt and a black long-sleeved shirt. Both were made of a light, breathable, and almost stretchy material. Over those, she had created a black sweatshirt trimmed with gold that could be zipped up like a jacket. The clothes were perfect for working, casual wear, and still looked nice enough to wear for meeting the princesses. They had plenty of apples, thanks to Applejack, and Pinkie Pie was already going overboard in the sweets department, but they still hadn't figured out just what it was that humans ate. Unfortunately, they couldn't seem to get him to focus long enough to tell them. He had a very short attention span, which was an even greater reason he seemed to get along well with Pinkie Pie. The most they could get out of him was that he enjoyed eating something called ramen. "I'm almost done," he replied, the small boy just finishing cleaning between his toes. "Rarity is here. She brought you some new clothes," Fluttershy announced. Naruto blushed. It was bizarre. Back in Konoha, everybody wore clothes. Being naked was something to be embarrassed about after a certain age. But here, nobody thought it odd to be nude, which had been made clear when Fluttershy had waited for him to remove his clothes so he could take his bath. I mean, sure he was a kid and she did have an excuse as he still had a few bandages she had to remove, but still. "Can you leave them outside the door, Ms. Fluttershy?" the blonde boy asked, and said Mare giggled. It was strange to see such a small creature be so embarrassed just from a lack of clothing. "Of course. Please try to hurry. The princesses will be here soon and you want to be presentable, right?" "Thank you," was her reply, and with a roll of her eyes, she placed the clothing right outside the door, as requested. Returning to the living room, she sat on the sofa next to Rarity, who was eagerly awaiting Naruto's grand entrance in his new clothing. When he finally did come out, the fashionista's eyes had stars in them. Fluttershy smiled brightly as well. The black and gold complemented each other quite well, and the full sweatsuit on such a young boy. "Oh my dear, you look absolutely fabulous." Rarity practically squealed. "I think I might have outdone myself on this one." Fluttershy couldn't help but to agree. "You do look very nice, Naruto," she said, and the boy blushed at the compliments. Rarity leapt to her hooves and began to circle the boy. "A rather simple design, but it did turn out absolutely amazing," she beamed. "Is it comfortable?" "Oh yeah," Naruto agreed emphatically, twisting and stretching. "A lot better than my old clothes." Before she could say anything, the boy leapt up and hugged her, causing the unicorn to giggle. "Thank you so much, Ms. Rarity." "You're most welcome, darling. But please, you can just call me Rarity. I like my formalities, but for my friends, I make exceptions," she replied, smiling at the boy. Naruto's eyes widened and began to water. Never before had anyone call him their friend. Even with as kind as the old man was, he never once called him his friend. But he wasn't going to cry. Not in front of these two. "We should get moving to the library," Fluttershy announced, crouching low so that Naruto could hop onto her back. Naruto hadn't ridden her or Rainbow Dash yet, unfortunately, which caused her a bit of pain and discomfort as the small boy tried to get settled around her wing joints. But as he did, that discomfort subsided and she actually felt a strange warmth in its place. She always felt good caring for small creatures, but this was different. She couldn't quite put her hoof on it, but there was something about this human child. "Twilight will be waiting for us." Twilight was indeed waiting, but it was for someone of the more royal variety. She had sent Spike off with Pinkie Pie just so she could have some alone time with Princess Celestia. The princesses were coming early in order to discuss Twilight's problem. Just the stress of it all had her in shambles. She had for the most part been avoiding Naruto for fear her horn reacting might give away her part in bringing him here. She was pacing the floor, blowing strands of her mane out of her face as a glow from behind her caught her attention. Princess Celestia and Princess Luna stood before her now, using a teleportation spell to arrive unnoticed by anyone else. "Now then, my trusted student, care to tell us what is you so frantic?" Celestia asked, raising an eyebrow at her student's disheveled look. Even Luna looked very curious. She was slightly surprised when the normally composed pony bowed so low in shame, her horn actually punched a hole in the floor. "Princess it's durably silnifiltended unknoeduo." Celestia could barely space out the words her student was spewing faster than Rainbow Dash could fly. Using her magic to stand the unicorn back up, she looked Twilight right in the eye. "Care to run that by me one more time, Twilight Sparkle?" she asked, now confused beyond belief. Twilight took a deep breath, trying to calm down. After all, the princesses were here now. Surely they could figure out how to fix the mess she had created. "It's my fault," she announced. "I was working on a new spell to create a bridge between worlds and it backfired, and if I'm correct, it's that spell that dragged Naruto, the human child, to our world and I have no idea how to break the news to my friends or him." She looked away at the stern look her mentor shot her. It wasn't angry, but it was definitely stern. Twilight sparkle. You of all people should know the dangers of practicing magic without full comprehension of the spell you're attempting to perform, she announced. How exactly did this spell of yours backfire? Pinkie Pie. Celestia lost her serious look and just let out an exasperated sigh. Well, at least it had a reason to backfire, she replied. But Twilight, you need to tell your friends and the human the truth. I'm sure they will understand. But besides that, you are running yourself ragged worrying about this. But princess, how can I tell them? What if they all hate me? Twilight cried, worried. What if they don't want me to be their friend anymore? Twilight, you need to have faith in your friends, Celestia reminded her. Indeed, Luna said. Just as you had faith in me when last we met. Her sister nodded. I sincerely hope you tell them, and soon, my student, Celestia continued. But let's put that out of our minds for now. The others should be arriving soon. Twilight would have said more, but conceded the point and relented. Naruto swallowed hard, sweating under the scrutinizing gaze of the two princesses. Even at the age of 6, he knew what kind of trouble he might get in if he wasn't on his best behavior. Celestia and Luna kept alternating from looking at the blonde child to looking at each other. All while circling the human as though they were sharks rather than alicorns. He is interesting, isn't he, sister? Luna announced after a moment. Celestia nodded. Indeed. No fur, no scales. Merely some flesh and a strange-looking mane, she replied. I've honestly never seen anything quite like him before. There was something odd about him though, as though some part of him was out of balance with the rest. Luna felt it too, she was sure. The way she looked at her spoke incredibly loudly of the fact. Celestia leaned down to look Naruto in the eyes. If we're going to learn more about you, I need you to relax, alright? Now Naruto was getting worried. Normally when people told him to relax, it was not a good sign. What are you going to do? He asked nervously. Luna, knowing exactly what Celestia had planned, also leaned down to speak at the boy's eye level. In order to learn more about who you are, where you come from, and what you humans are like, we are going to take a look into your mind and get the information we require from your memories, she explained. Naruto's eyes were practically swirls. He didn't understand a thing Luna had just said. He didn't have any time to clarify, as the princesses began to be overtaken by the glow coming from their horns before they each gently touched the tips of them to his forehead. All 3 sets of pupils dilated and they all 3 suddenly went rigid, as though frozen in time. Fluttershy looked on, a tad worried, but Applejack assured her that everything was going to be just fine. The place was dark, damp and all around depressing. And as soon as the 2 alicorns landed, they immediately felt the pressure. Their hoofs were halfway submerged in the inch-deep water that seemed to stretch throughout the entire passage. A frown crossed Luna's face as she realized that something was very wrong. This is, she announced. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She didn't have to finish that sentence as her sister already figured it out. Both mares were speechless at the sight of Naruto's mindscape. Tunnels stretched for what seemed like miles, and they didn't want to think on the strange stench. I've never seen any pony with a mind so in disrepair. And for it to be a child. Celestia watched the emotions cross her sister's face. His whole world should be filled with joy. Care. Fun. She would have went on, but chose to just stop there. But this is an abomination. Celestia had far less experience walking the minds and dreams of beings. Her sister was way above her in that regard, so she trusted her. And she completely agreed that something was wrong. She was used to the sun. Ponies filled with joy, love, and friendship. But the depressed feeling that washed over her like a tidal wave was something she did not enjoy. She watched as her sister contoured into a face that could only be described as rage. And for Luna, if there was one thing she hated in the world, it was the harming of children. Be it mental or physical. I believe it may have been a good thing that your student spell backfired, sister. Celestia heard a deep growl from her sister, and for a moment, she feared that the nightmare power may be appearing once again. Luna's face contorted several more times, and she appeared to be almost out of breath. Poor child, if I ever meet the vile, despicable beings who have desecrated the mind of one so young, I'll. Sister. Celestia shouted, concern screaming in her eyes. The rage was new on her sister's face, and she feared what her sister would do. Luckily, her voice seemed to calm the Moon Princess, who took a few moments to compose herself as best she could, breathing deeply to help rein in her fury. When she was finally calm enough to think clearly, she gave a slight nod to her elder sister. We should move, Celestia said, turning to look down one of the many passageways. She could make out only the tiniest speck of light at the end and figured it would at least be a good place to start looking for the answers they were seeking. Slowly, she and her younger sister began to make the trek down the aforementioned hall. But the closer they came to the light, the further away it seemed. After what seemed like an hour, Celestia built up the curiosity to look over her shoulder, and her eyes widened. For all their walking, the two of them had only managed to walk about 10 feet. Both exhausted and exasperated, she sighed as her horn glowed. Enough of this. She practically demanded, as she and Luna were engulfed in what seemed to be a miniature sun, before launching down the hall at incredible speeds. Whatever was altering the hall to impeded them couldn't keep up with the sheer velocity with which they were moving, and that's why the two princesses came to an abrupt stop in front of a massive cage. Celestia looked to Luna for guidance, but like her, the princess of the night had never seen a gate so massive and dreary, either in the real world or the mental one. But they could hear a distinct sound coming from behind the bars. The sound of breathing. It became a slight rumble, and as they looked up into the sheer darkness behind the gate, they watched as a single glowing red eye snapped open, nearly piercing them with its gaze alone. How peculiar, a deep echoing voice rang out from the darkness. Here I lay, awaiting to meet my host, and I instead see two ponies, is it? Such exquisite creatures too, I wonder how you taste. Without warning, a giant claw slammed into the bars, but neither Celestia or Luna flinched. They could sense the strike for what it was, a probing attack. Not meant to harm them, merely see if they were afraid of him. It told them that this creature was intelligent, whatever it was. They could hear a low, rumbling laugh as the creature pulled back its claw. I see there is more to you both than mere flesh. The eye's gaze moved specifically to Princess Luna now, and it unnerved both sisters. And yet, despite the power, you try to cast away the darkness you once accepted so readily into your heart. You, my dear, are worthy of my interest. The darkness that once tainted me is nothing but shame and poison, shadowed one, Luna bristled. I care not for your interests, nor who you are. I will wipe you out of existence. As he horn glowed dangerously, the fox merely chuckled. Please do, he announced in a rather bored manner. Perhaps the blame from the others outside, coupled with your guilt, shall bring back the dark being you claim to be ashamed of. The glow around Luna's horn faded as, confused and somewhat taken aback, she stared at the shrouded creature before her. What are you talking about? Demanded Celestia, fully aware that she probably wouldn't care for the answer. The creature's mouth came into view now, a huge maw of razor-sharp teeth, larger than the princesses themselves. The boy and I are separate beings, but we have what you might call a symbiotic relationship. If he dies, I die as well. And if I die, he will be robbed of the energy that runs through him, a very slow, agonizing death, to be sure. The princesses grit their teeth, frustrated by this shrouded entity. But Celestia was smart. If this was about survival, he wouldn't have revealed himself to them at all. What do you want? She asked hesitantly, as though the words disgusted her merely leaving her mouth. The great beast grinned. My grudge is not with you, but the humans, save for the child I call my jailer. He is innocent in all of this, the beast announced, almost somberly. Be that as it may, being cooped up in a cage is not my idea of fun. It is dank, and dare I say lonely. As he said the last bit, he eyed Luna again, making the night princess even more uncomfortable. But it was only a moment before he continued. I will teach the boy what I know about how to utilize his natural abilities, as well as teach you ponies about the vile, pathetic race that calls themselves humans, and in return, all I ask is two things. You both seem to have vast mental abilities, perhaps even the ability to shape the mindscape into a more pleasant living space, and I wish for company. You, Dark One, once each week, shall return here, speak to me, and be all around pleasant, he demanded, before muttering a barely audible, Kami knows I could use the company of someone pleasant after my last jailer. Luna looked ready to refuse, but Celestia cut her off. The terms are fair, she said, though quite begrudgingly. Luna looked almost indignant. But sister. Princess Luna, sometimes you must do what is right, despite our personal feelings, she announced, and her sister took note of the anger lacing her words. Anger that was not being directed at her, but the beast behind the bars. This creature holds vast knowledge of not only Naruto's species, but their abilities, whatever they may be. The boy deserves that. So we have a deal. If you agree to my stipulation, Luna cut in, causing Celestia and the Eye to look at her in genuine curiosity. No matter what I do to make the mind of the child a more comfortable place for you, it is now and will likely remain in disrepair. I bet my right hoof that he has no idea you exist within him, and letting him know now could potentially shatter his mind. I cannot allow that to happen. And so, I will come and visit every week, I will change the decor, and you will tell us the information we wish to know, but you will have no contact with the child until such a time as I deem him ready to learn of your existence. There was silence, as the eyes and mouth disappeared. They heard the clicking of hooves on the floor and quickly descended. Both of their sets of eyes widened in shock and surprise when not only a pony, an alicorn, with a coat and mane of dark red, entered their vision. They took note that the stallion bore the same, glowing red eyes that they had been speaking to previously. He stuck his head up against the bars, which had shrunk in size to prevent his escape, smirking. Done. The princesses both blinked as they took a few steps away from the blonde boy, each holding a look of concern. The being known as QB had shown them quite a bit of Naruto's life before Twilight had unintentionally dragged him here. Despite that, it seemed only a few minutes had actually passed by in the waking world. Celestia looked at the child, then to the tiny dragon, Spike, and she smiled sweetly. Spike, would you please take Naruto to Sugar Cube Corner? You can tell them that anything either of you gets they may build to the palace. The rest of us have important matters to discuss. All but Luna seemed confused, but Spike complied, grabbing the hand of the young boy and leading him out of the library. The moment they had left, Luna and Celestia explained what had happened within Naruto's mind, much to the shock and horror of the 6 mares who had befriended him. They told about Naruto's sad existence in Konoha and about who exactly explained all this to them. When they came to the deal struck with QB, Rainbow Dash had had enough. What? She demanded, slamming her hoof on the floor. Why would you make a deal with something like that? If it's as demented as you made it sound. She left her sentence hanging, knowing her friends could fill in the rest. Even Pinkie Pie noticeably paled when they said her friend was the host of a demon, and Fluttershy was trembling more so than usual. It was our only course of action, Luna replied solemnly. I could not remove it, and we dare not use the power of the elements of harmony to do so either. Twilight was confused by the statement and voiced that confusion. What do you mean, princess? She asked, and Celestia filled them in on the other piece of information QB had informed them of. The demon's energy constantly flows into Naruto's, taken from the seal keeping him contained. If we remove that energy, it would essentially shut down his entire body, killing him. The 6 mares gasped, and tears even streamed down a few faces. Is there anything we can do? Rarity asked, and despite the seriousness, they saw Celestia smile. Yes, actually. Our deal with QB means Naruto won't learn of him until we deem him ready to. That being said, his seal is linked to his mental state and emotions. So long as he is allowed to be cared for and treated with love, as we would treat any filly or colt, it will actually serve to strengthen the seal. To that end, I have decided on a proper course of action, the Sun Princess announced. And that is? Asked Applejack. I would like Fluttershy, seeing as she has taken it upon herself to act as caregiver already, to legally take Naruto in as his guardian. She saw several surprised looks, but none so surprised as Fluttershy herself. What? Rainbow Dash asked. You mean like, you want her to adopt the kid? Celestia nodded, with Luna in agreement. Physically speaking, he is indeed a different species, the Moon Princess replied. But he is still just a child, and mentally speaking, very much like the children of ponies. I see no reason that adoption shouldn't be a valid option. What do you say, Fluttershy? Celestia asked, hopeful that Fluttershy wouldn't find the responsibility too daunting. Well, she stuttered. He is an orphan. I suppose just thinking of having a mother, rather than simply a watcher, would be good for him. Okay. Celestia and Luna both smiled appreciatively. It was a lot to ask of the timid pony, they knew, but it was in the child's best interests. Then I leave him in your capable hooves, she said, turning toward Twilight. We shall take our leave then, my most faithful student, and remember what I said. Have faith in your friends. In a blinding flash, both of the princesses had gone. Applejack raised an eyebrow and turned to Twilight. Just what the hay was that last part about, Sugar Cube? She asked, and Twilight swallowed before taking a deep breath. We should find Naruto. This concerns him too, she replied. Yeah, sure, replied Rainbow Dash, slightly snickering. And besides, we should probably go tell him that Fluttershy's his new mommy. Ooh oh, yeah. Shouted Pinkie Pie. He'll be so happy. And that means I have to plan a party for that too. Hey, maybe he could call you Mothershi. The timid Pegasus pony just blushed as Rarity and Applejack gave Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie a light smack, respectively, to the backs of their heads. Cut it out, you two, Applejack demanded. Alright, let's head on over to Sugar Cube Corner. Besides, if we leave him there too long, he'll wipe out the royal treasury. When they arrived, they saw Naruto and Spike chowing down on a veritable mountain of sweets, at least compared to them, much to the curiosity and slight disgust of passers-by. They still had yet to find out where exactly the boy's stomach led to, but it was obviously some pocket dimension. Deciding to indulge as well, Pinkie dove into the pile like one would dive into a lake. Nobody was sure how she did it, seeing as the pile wasn't even near big enough to conceal the mare, yet she somehow disappeared into it. Naruto, could you come here, please? Fluttershy called, and the boy readily responded, cinnamon bun still in hand. Naruto, I have something very important to tell you. The boy almost dropped his treat. He'd heard those words before. They almost always signaled bad news. Leaning down to meet him at eye level, Fluttershy smiled brightly at the human boy. Naruto, would you like to stay with me? Naruto seemed confused. Wasn't he already staying with her? What do you mean? He asked. She bit her lip the moment of truth. Well, what I mean is I kinda sorta well, I just adopted you this time. Naruto did drop his treat as the weight of what she had said truly hit him. His eyes began to water now, and Fluttershy was afraid she might have upset the boy. Her fears were alleviated when he instead threw his arms around her neck, pulling her into a giant hug. It would have been a more touching scene had Pinkie Pie not covered them in a massive confetti. Clearing her throat, Twilight stepped towards Naruto, drawing everyone's attention. At least by this time, her horn had ceased reacting to him. I also have something to say, Naruto. I'm sorry. The boy just tilted his head in confusion. What did Twilight have to be sorry about? It's my fault, I'm the one that brought you here, it was an accident, but still. Her friends looked at her like she had sprouted a second head. What in the world are you talking about? Applejack asked, and Twilight blushed. When I was working on that spell, the one Pinkie Pie scared me into overloading. As every pony stared at their party-loving friend, she just smiled and waved. That spell is supposed to use two people as bridge points to travel between different worlds. I had thought, though, since nobody knew I was attempting the spell, it would just cancel itself, as the magic needs a willing being on the other side to connect with. Naruto thought long and hard before his eyes widened. And then I made my wish, he said, and the others looked confused. You made a wish? Asked Rainbow, and Naruto nodded. Before I woke up in Fluttershy's house, I was wishing that I had friends and family and a better life. Now I have all three. He said excitedly, looking to his new mother. It would be strange thinking of a pony as his mother, but who cared? Fluttershy was nice and awesome. Twilight's anxiety seemed to shatter into a look of realization. Of course. She shouted. Now it makes sense. With the overload of my spell, the magic latched onto your wish, considering it as a willing acceptance to form the bridge between your world and ours. Her anxiety returned when the boy gave her an unreadable look. But I'm still sorry. Despite everything, I basically took you away from everything you knew. But everything I knew sucked, he replied. Besides, you said it was an accident, right? Then that means it's not your fault in the first place. Astounded by the simple logic of the small child, she looked into the chuckling faces of her friends. So, you guys aren't mad at me? She asked, getting a snort from Applejack. Nah, she said. Least you're being honest about it and owning up to it. Besides, it looks like it all worked out pretty well. The five mares looked on at Naruto, now sitting contentedly on Fluttershy's back, laughed with mirth, his adoptive parent just smiling up at him. Dear Princess Celestia. Today, I learned that even when it looks like you've made a large mess, your friends will always be there to help get you through it. Everyone makes mistakes, and hiding them is never a good thing. You just need to have a little faith and know that real friends will not spurn you, but instead help you fix what you messed up. Mistakes are how we learn, after all, and we make them all the time. It's what we choose to learn from the mistakes that strengthens that friendship. Your most faithful student. Twilight Sparkle. Celestia smiled as she read her student's friendship report. She was truly glad that Twilight had come clean and everything worked out alright. But still, as her thoughts drifted to the human boy and just what he contained within him, she knew there would almost certainly be difficult times ahead, but he was also certain that the six bearers of the elements of harmony could get through it. The room was simple. 4 walls, bare for but a few decoratory weapons. A coat of arms bearing a kanji inscription. For one occupant of the small yet quaint space, the kanji was unreadable, as she hadn't taken to learning the written language, but the other, quietly sipping tea, knew what it said quite well. Roughly translated into the language of his companion, it stated power is peace. The male smirked a bit, knowing full well that even if she could read it, the lady before him wouldn't understand its true meaning. Most beings didn't. A lesson which too often fell on deaf ears. Levitating his cup of tea back to the table, the red aura surrounding it diminishing, QB looked across the table to the Princess of the Moon. She was an intriguing creature. An enigma which the old fox wished to understand. Using his demon chakra to manipulate the object before him, much in the same way the alicorn used magic to levitate and manipulate various things, sliding it across the game board. Looking up at her with a smile bizarrely filled with mirth and good humor, unnerving the princess, who had never before met a demon that acted in that manner, he motioned to the board. Jack, he announced, and she did indeed note that her king was in imminent danger. One thing QB had going for him, he was a very competent chess player. He knew it too. But Luna was no slouch either. It was really only while focusing on the game that she found herself calm enough to keep her end of the bargain and remain civil while dealing with the fox demon. They had been immersed in the match since shortly after she had arrived for her first weekly visit, entering through the dreamscape. They had been going for nearly an hour. Chess was one of the few things the two had found they had in common with each other. QB, being a manipulator of the highest degree, as evidenced by how easily he had gotten the two princesses to concede to such a deal as this, easily filled a chessmaster role. He had spent quite some time sealed away in not just Naruto, but others as well. He understood emotions far better than most and could very easily predict how others would react when pushed in just the right direction. For Luna, it was one of the few things she had come to enjoy about her own childhood. It was one of few things she was better at than her older sister. Despite knowing the game and being a chess master in her own right, Celestia always played trying to retain as many pieces as possible, usually to her detriment, as she didn't think sacrificing pieces to achieve the main goal was acceptable. It appeared though, after imprisoning Luna and the moon for 1,000 years, Celestia had gained a far more appreciative view of things and had even developed a manipulative streak, though the Sun Princess mainly manipulated to benefit others, rather than herself usually. She did seem to enjoy messing with her student and friends. Like at the last Grand Galloping Gala. Luna shook the thoughts from her head. Now was not the time to be reminiscing. She needed to get her king out of harm's way. "Tell me, demon," the princess demanded. "When we first met, how did you know about my fall?" Flashback. "I see there is more to you both than mere flesh." The eye's gaze moved specifically to Princess Luna now, and it unnerved both sisters. "And yet, despite the power, you try to cast away the darkness you once accepted so readily into your heart. You, my dear, are worthy of my interest." "The darkness that once tainted me is nothing but shame and poison," Shadowed One, Luna bristled. "I care not for your interests, nor who you are. I will wipe you out of existence." As he horn glowed dangerously, the fox merely chuckled. "Please do," he announced in a rather bored manner. "Perhaps the blame from the others outside, coupled with your guilt, shall bring back the dark being you claim to be ashamed of." The glow around Luna's horn faded as, confused and somewhat taken aback, she stared at the shrouded creature before her. Flashback end. "I indeed let myself be tainted by the darkness once. How did you, who had never met or even heard of me, know about the being that calls herself Nightmare Moon?" Luna continued, deciding to castle her king, sliding it around the rook and out of harm's way. QB just closed his eyes, as though deep in thought. Taking a sip of tea, he responded. "You ask a demon this?" he asked, almost sounding amused. "We all have a darkness within us. When anyone, succumbs to that darkness, even if they have shaken it off and begun to repent, it will ultimately leave its mark. I could see it in your eyes." Despite herself, Luna blushed. He had gotten that all simply by studying her eyes. Cracking a smile, QB again spoke. "Now let me ask you something, dear princess, why in the world would you, having been stripped of that power, try to repent and hold your darkness at bay?" Luna's face darkened. "The nightmare forces granted me great power, yes, but at a price." "All power comes with a price," QB announced evenly, sipping his tea. "And you were willing to pay that price, once. What's stopping you now?" "It isn't worth it," Luna replied softly after a moment, and QB quirked an eyebrow. "You're afraid of what you become." Luna's wings flared out dangerously as she snorted in indignation. "You have no idea what you're even talking about," she snapped. "I'm not the only one who paid the price for that power. Everyone I heard paid it, my sister paid it when she stopped me. Nothing good comes from the nightmare forces, and that is why I refuse to accept them again. Do not ever accuse me of being afraid." QB was silent for a moment before raising his hoof and tipping over his king. Luna looked on in a strange mix of rage and confusion as the fox-turned stallion stood, making toward the door to his new bedroom. He didn't even look over his shoulder as he spoke. "So, you're either afraid of what you become or afraid that you like what you become." Infuriated, Luna used her magic to send QB's now empty teacup smashing into the wall, inches from the doorframe and his head. This time, QB turned and was once again wearing that eerily cheerful smile. "I think this is the beginning of a very beautiful friendship between you and I." He chuckled as Luna, still enraged at his behavior, disappeared with a burst of magical power. "Very soon, you and I will see just what your limit is, dear princess. And then, I will see if you break." Looking to his king, laying Fullen on the board, his smile grew even greater. "But I concede this first battle to you. There will be many more in the war to come." Fluttershy smiled brightly as she prepared breakfast, her adoptive son still asleep and looking as if he wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. She just hoped she was preparing everything correctly. After having gone through Naruto's memories fully, the princess sisters had sent her notice of what the human diet consisted of. She was a little disturbed at the idea of Naruto eating meat, but knew enough about carnivores to settle her down. Besides, there were other things he could eat for protein. But she would figure that out later. For now, she was too concentrated on the work at hand, preparing the dish the humans called ramen. It was very new to her and would take some time to get just right, but she had quite a while to learn. She set the table before making her way to the boys' room, her room technically. The two were sleeping in the same room until they could afford to make an addition to her cottage. Entering, she saw her tiny white rabbit, Angel, attempting to wake the slumbering child, doing everything from shaking him to slapping him across the face. All the bunny got in return were even louder snores. He pawed his face and shook his head, turning to the Pegasus pony with a look that simply said, "He's your kid, you deal with him." She nudged the child, who groaned in his sleep, pulling the blanket over his head. "Naruto, it's time to get up." His head now went beneath the pillow. "Rise and shine." She again tried, beaming brightly, but to no avail. Come on, Naruto. We're going to go see about getting you enrolled in school. The boy now wrapped himself tighter in the blankets. Blowing some mane from out of her face, Fluttershy just sighed before turning toward the door. Well, alright. I guess I'll just find some pony else to eat this ramen with me. The Pegasus's mane was sent flying in all directions by the sudden gust of wind, consequently blowing the blanket over her. Throwing it off, she looked to see the blonde was already down the stairs. Smiling down at Angel, she raised her hoof. The bunny in turn bumped her hoof with his paw, smirking. Descending the stairs, she saw the boy already halfway through his bowl. Naruto, slow down, she said, worriedly. You'll make yourself sick if you keep eating like this. Naruto slurped up a large amount of noodles, making sure not to speak with his mouth full. Rarity gave him an earful the last time he did so in front of her. But Fluttershy, he whined. I haven't had ramen in so long. It's been days. The Pegasus pony just sighed and shook her head. As of yet, Naruto hadn't referred to her as his mother, and she was perfectly fine with that. This was an adjustment for the both of them, and while she knew it was in the best interests of the young blonde, it was still kind of bizarre for her to think of herself as the boy's mother. You still should slow down, she replied, smiling at the child. Then you could actually taste it. I can taste it just fine, Naruto argued, as his adoptive mother giggled at him. It's amazing. And I've had some pretty awesome ramen before. As he thought about Ichiraku's, Fluttershy beamed at the compliment to her cooking. She would have to make the dish more often. As she sampled some of her work, she was actually surprised at how good it turned out. So, are you ready to go meet Miss Cheerily at the school today? The Pegasus asked, hopeful that the boy would come around. His slowed eating and fallen face dashed those hopes, but again, it was in his best interests. I've told her all about you. She's really looking forward to meeting you. In fact, she wants to learn a bit about your world from you. Not many students get to teach the teacher. The boy smiled just a bit, but quickly returned to his sour face, which he stuffed further with noodles. Sighing, Fluttershy looked to the human boy in her charge. Please, Naruto. Just try this, for me the girls will be there with you, they can help you out. Naruto sighed, but nodded. He wasn't about to disappoint Fluttershy. Satisfied, Fluttershy finished the small bowl of noodles, while Naruto put away a second. He would have had more, but Fluttershy hadn't made very much, simply testing her recipe. While Naruto went upstairs to change out of his sleepwear, Fluttershy went outside to make sure all the animals were fed and tended to. Well, he certainly is an interesting one, isn't he, mused a Ponyville schoolteacher cheerily as she watched the human child play outside with Applebloom, Sweetie Belle, and Scootaloo. To tell you the truth, I was worried about whether he'd fit in or not, but none of the children seemed very bothered. Fluttershy smiled and nodded. Oh yes. He's quite spirited and doesn't seem to have much trouble making friends, the Pegasus replied, looking out the window at her adopted son. That's not what worries me. Back in the world he came from, he tended to be looked down upon by his teachers. He needs an education, but I think the reason he isn't thrilled with the idea of school is because he doesn't trust teachers. He needs to see that they aren't all mean and nasty. Cheerily nodded. She didn't know exactly the circumstances behind Naruto's apparent lack of education, but knew he deserved the same chance as any filly or colt in her class. Neither noticed that the game of tag had been interrupted by the arrival of two more school fillies. Silver Spoon and Diamond Tiara. The school's resident bullies. And based upon the faces of Naruto and his friends, they were engaging in said activity. I'm not exactly used to teaching humans, but then again, you aren't exactly used to raising them either. But as long as he's willing to learn, he's welcome in my class. Fluttershy beamed at the declaration. When can he start? She asked, knowing they couldn't just drop Naruto into a classroom right off the bat. Again, the two paid no heed to the fact that Naruto had seemingly vanished from view, the Crusaders looking confused as to where he had gone. Cheerily seemed to contemplate that for a moment. Well, she began, thinking it over carefully. Under normal circumstances, I would say he could join the class immediately, but we might want to wait until he gets settled, maybe sometime next week. Fluttershy nodded. It seemed like a fairly smart idea to her. Naruto, while certainly taking things pretty positively, all things considered, was still just a child. It would probably take him a bit more time to settle into his new life. Waiting another week certainly wouldn't hurt the boy and would actually give them a bit more time to bond as a family. Considering that was Celestia's original intention, she really couldn't argue anyway. Before she could say anything though, a shriek from outside finally caught their attention. Immediately bounding outside, Cheerily and Fluttershy went slack-jawed at the sight of Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon, covered in feathers and orange paint. The feathers, apparently, were held together with some kind of sticky paste, which also had the two stuck together at the flank. Despite herself, Cheerily had to fight to keep from snickering. Unfortunately, as a teacher, remaining unbiased was something she had to do, and it taught the children the lesson that there were bullies in the world that they just had to deal with. But she would be lying to herself if she said that seeing the two as feathery, orange balls wasn't the funniest thing she'd seen in a long time. The rest of the class was also trying to at least restrain themselves, lest the fury of the two ponies be turned on them. The cutie mark crusaders, already the target of most of the two fillies' bullying, were having an even harder time. Hearing quiet laughter, Fluttershy sighed sadly before moving behind one of the nearby trees, grabbing the back of Naruto's shirt before bringing him out to join the rest of his new classmates, provided of course Cheerilee still let him join her class. "Here's what I want to know," Rarity asked between sips of her tea, staring at the blushing Pegasus before her. "Where in Celestia's name did he manage to find a gallon of paste and enough feathers and orange paint to cover two fillies in the schoolyard?" "I asked him the same thing," Fluttershy uttered. "I couldn't get a straight answer though. At least he apologized, and Cheerilee is still going to let him go to school." Rarity just giggled. After going to meet with Cheerilee and with the school day wrapping up, Fluttershy just brought Naruto with her to Carousel Boutique, looking to share the experience with one of her closest friends. "Well, from what I hear from Sweetie Belle, those two certainly deserved it. But even still, it sounds like you're settling into your new role. I would imagine it's still a bit easier than handling my sister and her friends," she joked. "It's all so new to me," replied Fluttershy, setting down her tea. "Handling the girls is one thing, but I don't know if I can pull off being a mother to Naruto." Rarity rolled her eyes. "Fluttershy, you need to have a bit more faith in yourself. You seem to be doing a fabulous job. You already took it upon yourself to put him in school, you made sure that he apologized for his prank, and from the praise I heard earlier, managed to pull off his self-proclaimed favorite food," the fashionista announced, trying to help encourage the timid Pegasus. "And besides, you have all of us here to help as well. Between us, the girls, and Spike, his seal will be strong enough to hold back 10 demons if the princesses were correct about its workings." Fluttershy shuddered. That was another thing that was bothering her. How the demon came to be sealed into her charge to begin with. Why it was sealed. She just hoped Princess Luna could deduce the answers and relay them to her. She just hoped that if it was gifted with intelligence, like the princesses claimed, that it might also be gifted with compassion. She finished her tea just as Naruto and the cutie mark crusaders tumbled down the stairs in a heap. "Okay," Scootaloo grunted. "Cutie mark crusader pony cannonballs probably wasn't my best idea. Can we try something that doesn't cause every pony to fall on me?" announced Sweetie Belle, a dazed look on her face. "Probably not a good idea to fall on the one with the horn," Naruto agreed, pushing himself to his feet. Scootaloo and Apple Bloom just nodded, blankly staring at Sweetie Belle's horn as though they just had realized it was there. Granted, it wasn't necessarily sharp, but it would still be an uncomfortable experience. As the four ran outside, Rarity giggled a bit. Sure, the antics of her sister and the other crusaders often got on her nerves, but there was something about the human boy joining in that made it bizarrely adorable. The girls were a very close-knit group, and to allow not only a boy into their midst, but one of a different species. Rarity was actually proud of Sweetie Belle. They treated him as if he were any other colt, which was exactly what Naruto needed right now. He needed to belong. Hearing the sound of hooves, they turned to the door to see Twilight, with Spike on her back, entering the room. Not usually important, except for the scroll the dragon was holding. "Fluttershy, there you are," Twilight sighed in relief. But Fluttershy didn't like the look present on her face. "Twilight, darling, what's wrong? You look a bit green," Rarity said, quirking an eyebrow at Twilight's disheveled appearance. And she had just gotten back to normal, too. Spike chose to answer instead. "We just got a letter from Princess Luna," he announced. "And you might want to read it yourself." Looking to one another, Fluttershy and Rarity's eyes moved onto the now unrolled scroll, eyes growing wider with each line, until eventually Fluttershy was quivering. "Fluttershy. As you are aware, I have agreed to meet with the demon sealed within your adopted son once every week. I had thought the demon would be easy enough to handle, despite being unable to rid the child of it, but it has already begun to get under my skin. Despite its malicious demon nature, it is inherently an animal. Given your skill handling animals, demonstrated by both your readiness to care for the child, as well as ridding us of a dragon merely through words, I believe it would be best, 1 week from tonight, for you to venture into Naruto's mind with me. Perhaps you can make the vile creature within him back down. Sincerely. Princess Luna of Equestria." Turning back to Fluttershy, Twilight, Rarity and Spike's eyes widened as she was nowhere to be seen. Hearing a rattling, they turned toward Rarity's couch and saw the bits of pink mane sticking out from beneath it. Twilight just sighed and used her magic to levitate the couch off of the Pegasus pony, who let out an eep before covering her eyes with her hooves. "She wants me to try and deal with a demon that both princesses couldn't." "I'm sure it won't be that bad," Twilight said, trying to be reassuring. The only reason they didn't take care of the demon is because of what it would do to Naruto. Plus, you'll have Luna there and it needs her to keep Naruto's mindscape anything but the giant cage it originally was. At the very least, it eased Fluttershy's fears enough to allow her to stand, but she still seemed visibly shaken. At least I hope it won't go bad, the unicorn thought, watching the Pegasus pony walk outside to try and find her charge. There's some sort of lingering energy, I can feel it. Whatever took Naruto left us the key to follow it. Looking at his former student as he spoke, Sarutobi grunted, acknowledging that he had heard the Toad Sage. And how long until we can follow Naruto? He asked, and Jiraiya sighed, rubbing his temples. I can't be sure, he announced. Theoretically, I could capture and then channel the ambient energy into a seal array and redirect it back to its source, but figuring out how to do so, and also how to properly design a functioning seal array, is going to take time. It could take anywhere from a few weeks to a few years, and by that time, most of the energy left over will likely have dissipated. Unless we get another surge, we may very well be stuck. Sarutobi said nothing. He ground his teeth into his pipe in irritation as he just stared at the sky above. I don't care what you have to do, he replied, and Jiraiya recognized immediately the fire that had relit within the aged man. This was not Hiruzen Sarutobi. This was the third Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village. And it was about damn time he truly came out of retirement. Jiraiya wanted to know Naruto was safe as well. It was for his safety that he left Naruto in the care of the village after Minato and Kushina died. But it appeared even Konoha wasn't safe anymore. He swore though that he was going to get his godson back and make up for that lost time. Sarutobi agreed in full. As of this moment, you have full reign over this matter and access to all the resources at the village's disposal. If Naruto is alive, wherever he is, we will bring him home and we will make his abductors rue the day they ever messed with the legacy of the fourth Hokage. So this part ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so quickly like this video for second part of this series. And comment down below your thoughts about this series. And now it's time for me to go, bye.